Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Brace for Reality and Jump for Certainty. I have two lovely faces in front of me right now. One is my host, Charlotte.
Hello.
And our friend and peer on the trip, Dominic.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited for this episode today, actually. I think we left off the last one on quite a thriller note. Charlotte, maybe you want to fill us in kind of where we ended off there.
Yeah, so we've been talking a lot about failure in the last episode, and we ended off talking about how our personal development is one part that we are scared to fail, let's say. So let's see how all of this continues. Yeah.
And I think just something to add to that, I don't think that we can fail our development. I think that we're at least just experiencing a lot of things and reaching these new awareness points. And sometimes it's difficult to know, how do I manage this awareness? I don't know if you have something to add to that, Dom.
I think you framed it quite perfectly also that because there's this work part to this trip, but also the personal development. And we're all just seeking, we're all just trying. But then the fear is sometimes holding us back of trying. So it's an interesting concept to talk about. So I'm really curious to hear this episode, I must say.
Yeah, if I can add, I think like this whole trip and what we've seen till now is that like everything, all of this is all about experience. So we're also experiencing this personal development, and it's been like very interesting journey so far.
I think it's so interesting that we're all kind of together in this bubble, going through somewhat of the same process and having similar goals in really wanting to develop and actually really trying. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how we're going to hold ourselves when we leave this bubble and go into the world.
Yeah, I also wanted to add that the beauty of this trip is also that we have ourselves, that we can help ourselves and make sense of all of this, what is happening, and maybe just raise some questions we would individually never ask ourselves. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be interesting how this will proceed even beyond this trip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just to give a little update to everyone, right now, everyone here is just talking about development. Like we hear only conversations about people thinking about developing themselves. And one of our friends just said earlier, like everyone is just becoming a psychologist at this point. So
My inner self has awakened.
absolutely.
She's been sleeping for the past 25 years.
So maybe, Dom, can you tell us a bit more about the topic today?
Yes, I think, just to steer us in a slightly new direction, we are in the process, we are quite well acquainted with our companies now, at least. That's where we are in our academic journey. It's been about 2 weeks now that we've been working with them quite religiously and long hours. And I think a theme that's really come up a lot is this theme of complexity. And how do we see it? How do we understand it? How do we manage it? And Dom, I think it would be interesting to hear, how do you interpret complexity and in the context that you're in now?
I think my initial thought is that complexity is making you fear a lot. It's overwhelming. It's not knowing what to do in the beginning. And as soon as you accept this field, it's also something beautiful, something that you want to discover or that gives you the room to discover. If a task, for example, is relatively clear, you're sort of fixed on the way how to solve it already. You're sort of also functional fixed what this topic is even that you're talking about. You're not even raising the question, what are we dealing with here? What's the way to reach the goal? You don't have these conversations because it's so clear, it's so simple. But then with complexity, there comes a lot of confusion, a lot of conversations about what is it actually that we're trying to solve here? What's the real problem among all the things that appear so dramatic, so problematic?
Can you give us any, I don't know how you've experienced this within your company or within yourself, theme of, or this feeling of complexity?
Yeah, it was quite interesting for our group because we started this journey with a very clear direction. The company gave us a set of milestones we should reach, which were very clearly defined and appeared to be like a to-do list of things that need to be accomplished. Each task has some sort of complexity within itself. For example, pursuing a market research and designing a market entry strategy for a company in a foreign surrounding is really complex in the essence. But it's also very clear. It's like a very targeted goal compared to you want to improve your business. You're asking yourselves the question, how can we innovate ourselves? How can we stay ahead of the curve, grow as a company? It's a much broader question and involves way more solutions than just entering a new market, entering a new country. So I think by raising all these questions, why they want to pursue with this market entry strategy, why they want to grow and expand to different countries, we reached a point where we finally ended up also asking the real questions. What is your goal? What are you trying to solve?
How you met with that? Were people having contrasting views on that, or?
Yeah, we had a lot of discussions, a lot of meetings that didn't lead to the success that we have been able to convince them actually framing the challenge as something about innovating their current business model. Just also staying within their market, trying to include more solutions than just an expansion. We ended up doing a lot of market research until now and also trying to cater their needs, which they've given to us.
I think like something also with this whole like process of complexity, and as you just said, Dom, now like understanding the goals, it can sound like such a basic question, like what is the goal? Like surely there needs to be one answer because everybody has to be aligned. But at least for my experience, at least in our company, it just felt like I thought that I had all the answers through all the models and frameworks that we've been taught in school. Like this is how we innovate a platform. These are the features. We need this information, and we can plug it in and find a solution for them. And unfortunately, trying to get this information, it was so difficult for us. The process, it just felt like being consistently somewhat in a, I don't know, not lost in translation, but just not being able to get the information that we needed. And even when we did get information, the models that we've been taught, they didn't really work in reality. And I think that was really frustrating for us. It was not a nice feeling for us to navigate because, you know, we thought we were going to have all these answers and we were so knowledgeable with all these tools, but the world is not a sanitized place, unfortunately, and it's not that simple. I don't know, Charlotte, if you have something to add to that. How was it for you to use complexity from a different context?
I think that maybe one example that I can talk about as well is we were doing this market sizing, which seems to be the exercise that we do for any consulting case, for anything. If you do an interview or market sizing, I don't know, you just do it all the time. And it appeared that me and my partner working on this, we just went completely wrong because we just took the complete European perspective. And even though we thought, okay, now we are really immersed in the Indian perspective, we just completely failed in understanding the context and the complexity of it. And people don't use the same apps as us. They don't even have like internet, etc. And it's a very different and complex task when you actually take it out of like its context. And I thought that was actually such an interesting task.
I think that's such a good point because I think our group at one point we were so, I would say, slightly ignorant. We had this whole plan for their business model, like, well, why have they not done this yet? This is so obvious. Like in Europe, we do this and this and this. And we chat then with the CEO and we're so chuffed, like, oh, we're going to blow his socks off with this idea. And we present it to him and he goes, but in India, we don't have people don't have smartphones. They're using like eSIM cards and we have to connect them through the phones like that. That completely escaped us. We didn't even think of considering that. So I think, again, just being a bit lost in this complexity and just assuming things from our own context.
Maybe add a little different experience. I think the common theme in complexity is that you start on talking how to solve the problem. You just try to make sense out of it. So I think a very vital part is then just taking one step. It doesn't matter in which direction, but just moving forward, at least trying. And in our case, we try to move forward with the knowledge we have how to deal that complexity. But we ended up getting a lot of backfire from the company about the way we approach the problem because they had a slightly different understanding how we should approach it. Coming back to the milestones, they had this picture of you should do that to reach the goal of this project. And we were like, no, trust our process. We have a reason why we're doing that.
So do you feel like that was like a hindrance for you almost?
A huge obstacle for the whole time. Just because we try to open their eyes for more solutions than just what they had. We try to really help them with the core of the actual problem, the core of the complexity, how we look at the problem. But we ended up having too many discussions so that we also had to sort of reach a balance again. What do they want? What do we want? And how do we reach a middle ground?
Yeah. But actually, to add up on that, it's interesting because learning that I've had here is that they approach problems very differently than we do. We always find the logic. We always need to have like a common logic for something we have already seen before, etc. And in India, they actually do differently. They always consider the context first, and it's like every experience is different. And so that's why sometimes you can also end up in a situation where they take into consideration all this context and all this history and everything, and you have just not thought about it. And this is how sometimes we ended up being into like some different grounds, I would say, because we had a very standard logic and thing we apply to everything, but it's actually very much different. And I think this is also a different way of thinking. Like even the thinking process is complex.
Would you say though, Charlotte, like overall with your experience, with the knowledge that you have now after going through this whole process with the company, navigating that complexity, learning their different ways, understanding your ways, and as you said, Dom, finding this middle ground, how do you think that you can use complexity to your advantage? Any takers?
I think it goes back to a point I made earlier. There's a huge opportunity in complexity that you can explore way more. You're not fixed to just one way of doing it. Also, in this experience, it's nice to have different functional backgrounds within one team because they look so differently at a problem. And it might appear so logical to follow your way, but through conversations, we found out many different ways how to solve this problem. So I used to get a little bit overwhelmed by complexity, but I'm getting better and better by just accepting the fact that we don't know everything, but we will at some point. Not everything maybe in the end. That's a bit ambitious. But at least like we don't confuse ourselves in the beginning because we're just starting. We're just taking the first steps in complexity.
And Dom, do you mind maybe sharing how is this process of navigating complexity with the companies? Has it had any effect or translated into your personal development or your maybe navigating your own personal complexity? Because as we've said, this journey is about the companies and our academic research, but it's also about ourselves.
I think it's a very interesting question, first of all. For me personally, I think it's the diversity that is needed to solve a problem more holistically, but then also the common ground you need to reach to actually get things done. I think this balance is really interesting to me personally because there are so many ways to solve it, because there are so many ways to move forward to one goal. Maybe not the perfect result or solution, but at least like to move forward. It needs some backup. It needs a common ground. It needs a mutual understanding of, hey, this is what we're doing. So communication is key, finding the right way of communicating and also really trying to understand why people think differently, why they want to go about a problem from that perspective and not from...
Do you maybe have an experience of something that's happened on the trip for your personal development or like navigating the complexity within yourself?
I think sometimes it really helps to share your confusion when you really don't get why somebody is acting one way. Let me try to think of an example.
I think maybe I actually have an example for you because we often do these evening reflections and sometimes they can be quite vulnerable, sharing your inner thoughts with a whole group of 30 students. And one thing that I've noticed, Dom, is often I love it when you'll say a point and then maybe we'll go quiet. You'll take the space again and be like, but I'm actually not so sure about this. I'm actually wondering about this. And I think you being able to share this maybe complexity or whatever that you're feeling, it instantly makes the whole group kind of feel lightened. Like, aha, like he's also a bit confused. This is actually a bit difficult. Like maybe I don't need to know the answer to this right now. Maybe we're all figuring it out right now. So I think that's at least a beautiful thing that I got to witness in the reflection sessions from you. It's sharing the confusion.
Yeah, for example, in our case, with the market entry strategy, you just start off. You just bounce off a few ideas. You explore what you can do in this field. You search for first clues what you can do. I remember one situation where I then just suggested one way of approaching it, which might have confusion in the group just because I just said one thing that felt right to me.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to share that that's the most promising I think there is in all these options. It doesn't mean that's the perfect solution or a perfect way to do it. So please tell me if you have a different thought how to overcome this complexity, how to move forward, how to find new cues that might result into a more clear path how to overcome this. So I think it helps to create a space where you can question your approaches, where you can be vulnerable about you also don't know, but you're just trying.
what is the certainty in complexity? Or is there any certainty in complexity?
Hard question.
I think there's certainties that you have to keep on exploring. Even though you might found something that seems really promising, there's always a different solution.
Yeah, I think that the certainty for me is that you never know everything. And I feel like I've been actually realizing so much more about like how much I didn't know when I've been talking to people and I've been maybe having like a quick opinion about what they just said. And then suddenly they talk about their own story and I'm like, wow, that just makes so much more sense with what they said earlier. Like, and I just kind of judged it super fast or something. But in the end, it's like, okay, there was so much more to this than I thought. And I feel like I've been just experiencing this so many times, and this is really something that I hope I bring with me, is to always think, okay, there is always a context and you really have to learn it, and you will never know all about it, but try to seek for what is important in it.
Or not learn it, but be present in it.
Exactly, be present and be open to understanding more, and never, I would say, coming back to never just judging something.
But on the same side, I feel like complexity is also a bit of an inflated word. So we tend to just call everything complex.
Yeah, I agree.
Might not be. So maybe sometimes coming up with a quick judgment, or if you phrase it a little bit different, quick decision about how to do things instead of opening up and keep on exploring, it's also the right way, because
We also have to live.
we don't have to overcomplicate it.
Yes,
I agree. I think it's a balance, actually. I think this is something that we've been also learning a lot, is how to balance this out, because we can't know everything.
But I think, Charlotte, what you framed really lovely is, I think the antidote to complexity is being embedded in this context or being present in it. Because, as you said, when we weren't being aware during the company time, maybe applying this very rigid European mindset, we often met with failure and it was frustrating. But the more time, we put dedicated to, but maybe it is like this, or it's like this because this is how it is here, became a lot more clearer. So I think that is at least something that I will take with me when navigating through the next complexity in this long life, is to really just try and be aware of, where am I right now? What is actually the truth in front of me? What am I observing? And kind of not jumping to these conclusions. I think that's a great way to end this. And thank you so much, Domi, for joining us. I think it was a really, really interesting discussion. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Alrighty, ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao.